listening to Walk It Out with Trisha Goyer, where we discover what it looks like to follow God and be swept away on the journey of a lifetime. Author of over 70 books, mom of 10, yes, 10, homeschooler and speaker, Trisha Goyer will explore what radical obedience to God's word looks like. It's time to hear from God lovers who've dared to say yes. Listen in to heart chats and learn how others overcame doubts and fears. Discover how God used ordinary people to impact others one step at a time. If you're ready to get radical, get going, and make a difference in this world, you're at the right place. Here's your host, prolific writer, world traveler, people lover, and mega nap taker, Trisha Goyer.
Well, hello, friends. On Walk It Out, we are talking about a more difficult subject today. We're going to be talking about a book called Groomed, Overcoming the Messages That Shaped Our Past and Limit Our Future. But I know this is such an important topic as someone who has adopted girls, older girls from foster care, as someone who works with teen moms regularly. The stories I hear are so heartbreaking. And I think even though this is a hard topic, we all just need to be educated on what's really happening, and we need to be a voice and a help for those who need our love. So let me tell you a little bit about my guest today. Elizabeth Fisher Good is a CEO and founder of Selah Freedom and Selah Way Foundation, which exists to prevent sexual abuse, exploitation, and sex trafficking of children and young adults. Through her leadership, thousands of American children and young adults who have been rescued from the sex trade have found freedom. She has also helped educate millions on the topics of exploitation and sex trafficking. Elizabeth speaks and trains internationally and is passionate about protecting our youth from the secrets of abuse so many of them are forced to keep. Her family is her true pride and joy, and she lives with her husband and 3 children in Sarasota, Florida. So welcome, Elizabeth.
Hello. Thank you, Trisha, so much for having me on the show. Thank you.
Yeah, and just start by telling me a little bit about yourself.
Well, I am a born and raised Chicagoan, been in Florida for the last 10 years. Had a very ethnic, fun family growing up, and the youngest of probably 35 cousins. And through that process, my dad came over from Puerto Rico. My mom is from Arkansas, like super, super rural, Melendez and O'Brien. And just went through a lot at a really young life, had some serious losses, serious secrets, serious trauma, and just sort of tried to navigate. And I think, we always say, God gives us our stories for a reason. Like, I think everything that I'm going to share and talk with you about today, like, it's now in gratitude that I could see how God used all of that, the loss of my sister, different, things that were, horrible at the time, but it just makes you so much more relatable and have the ability to really speak into others' lives and just be humble. And so there's a lot to my story.
There is. And now I'm in Arkansas, so we are just south of Little Rock. Yes.
Get out of here. I'm coming in the next couple of weeks. I got to see you.
Oh, wow. Yes, we could do that.
That's so funny. Wow. That's great.
Outside cafe. Because
yes, exactly.
Many things are open. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, so we've lived here for about 10 years, but yeah, just outside of Little Rock.
Aw, that's excellent. One of my favorite uncles is actually really getting old there, and I haven't seen him in quite a few years. And if you read the book Groomed, he was my great uncle that I just loved. And I had another person that was close to us that was one of the guys that actually abused me, and it's shut me down to a lot. So I sort of avoided these guys. So going back to Arkansas for me is a very big, beautiful full circle.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Now, let's just start with your story, because we've already mentioned the loss of your sister and then this church person that hurt you, which is so familiar to so many people, including me. Just start by telling a little bit about your story.
Okay. Well, raised in Chicago, but my mom's family was in Arkansas. So every summer we would go to Arkansas, and it was just beautiful. Like, my dad's his family's the loud Puerto Rican city fun. And then you go to rural Arkansas. And just everyone had acres and acres and acres and baby chicks and horses. And I would name the babies when they're born. And just, it was like the little idyllic getaway. And after coming home, I was 9 years younger than my sister and 11 years younger than my brother. And after coming home from Arkansas the summer that I was turning 7, my brother was putting away his rifles and everything and just crazy accident. The gun fired. My sister was in the hallway. It fired through a doorway and hit her in the temple. He was 17, she was 15, and she was just killed instantly. So that was pretty traumatic because she was like my emotional everything. My mom's one of those fantastic caretakers, but not super emotional. And I was like her little baby doll, and you go to bed with this, everything intact, and you wake up to chaos. And I think from that point on, I've had a very, I want to say insulated journey, I guess, because it was a lot of me really taking care of me from that point on. All of my amazing people just were overwhelmed with grief and trying to survive because, he had taken her life himself. So he sort of just lost it, joined the Navy, turned 18, a few months later left. My parents just pretty much shut down. So that was the beginning of sort of a journey to trying to figure things out on my own. I wasn't getting asked how I was grieving because everyone else was grieving. I thought I was too young to really feel it. So that's a big point of the book, the things that we weren't given the opportunity to take hold of.
Yeah, and I think kids, they don't know how to process things. And then when you talk about like no one talked about your sister, and even said you're too young to remember her. I mean, all these things that people were telling you, kids just kind of pull into themselves and they don't know how to process things. And we've adopted 7 kids, but 4 of them we adopt as teenagers. And even the things that are good, sometimes they think are bad, and the things are bad they think are good because little kids just don't know how to process things. And it just takes talking through a lot. But I can see as a young girl just thinking, I'm alone, and like there's no one I could talk to. You lost your sister, your parents split up. I mean, that is so hard for a little kid to go through. And then I know it just builds as the years go by on these different beliefs that we have.
Yeah, thing after thing happened. So sort of, one of the pivotal things I speak about in there is a few months later, one of my cousins was getting married and I was a flower girl and there's all the bridesmaids of all the cousins and they left the spot where my sister would have stood. And afterwards, I was just crying. I remember sitting in my little crumply dress and just crying. And one of the oldest cousins came up to me and she's like, "Why are you crying?" And I'm like, "Oh, because I miss Diana." And she's like, you're not even old enough to remember her. And then I was like, wow, like people just don't want to know how I'm doing. Okay, I shouldn't feel anything. So then when it rolled into, a few summers later, I had one of those, leaders in the church that he totally shocked me by sexually molesting me. And then went up and took his position on the stage as the worship leader, picked up his guitar and started singing. And I was like, oh my gosh, but there was not a thing in me that would have thought to tell someone because I'd already been groomed to think no one really needs to know how you feel.
Yeah.
Other people's feelings are more important. And I just kept it, and I think with most girls, and boys, if something happens like that, we turn inward, but I'd already gotten that messaging pretty strong.
And it's so true. And even thinking back, I mean, I became sexually active at a young age and just this input of movies that my stepdad especially watched. And I mean, women were just treated so poorly and that's what girls were good for. And that's how you get a boy. And looking back, I mean, for years it was like that guilt, like I'm such a horrible person, but like reading a book like Groomed and then working with teen moms and then having teen daughters, it's like, it's not your fault. Like there's so many messages that are going in and so many people hurting you. And I think we internalize it like we're a bad person or we are that type of person or, when someone abuses us, we deserve it. I mean, there's so many things that we do get groomed for. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you know what? And I have no greater passion because a child, I mean, I think the enemy tries to take our identity before we're born, right? He would love to have everybody killed before they're born. But if he could get somebody through sexual abuse or something happening in the deepest place of your intimacy like that, it screws up an identity for so long. It's one of the only crimes that is done against the victim. And then the victim takes on all of the shame, all of the horrific feelings and just everything's upon yourself. And so for me, like looking at, like you said, look at our society today. I mean, when you and I were growing up, I mean, there was Playboys laying around and maybe it was the beginning of on TV and porn and things like that. But now the images and teen porn is the most searched on the internet. It's the most sought after porn. Teen porn is what is entered into the search bar. And the way that the shows are, there's always a strip, pole in the background of any TV show, there's always, if you notice, like
Right.
there's something introduced to desensitize. Our kids are getting desensitized. And we have a prevention program at one of the foundations that I run. And it works with kids kindergarten through high school. And people are always like, oh, you shouldn't start in kindergarten. That's too little. You should start in high school. I'm like, by high school, they've been keeping secrets for 7 years. Like, you have got to start in kindergarten because they're getting groomed with, even if someone doesn't sexually abuse a kid, 1 out of 9 of our little kids are getting approached on social media, being told they're pretty. Hey, you want to pull your shirt down a little bit? Like, this world is so crazy. And my passion is to just get in front of girls and help them and boys realize their worth, because I think our kids are the greatest target there is. And we have to have a wake up call, a wake up call in the church to talk about what's happening, a wake up call for parents to really look at it and see how young, 8 years old is when most kids are exposed to porn.
Yeah. And it's usually another kid with a phone or some access to the internet saying, look at this.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah,
On
neighborhood's
the bus,
kid down the street. Yeah, I saw someone's naked butt on someone's phone. I'm like, oh my goodness, no. I mean, this is my own children in my own neighborhood with kids that we trust and we know their parents. And, it's just like, oh, it's so, so hard.
Well, and the thing is that, abuse is learned. And if the stats now, the good news is when we started this over a decade ago, it used to be 1 out of 3 little girls and 1 out of 5 little boys have been sexually abused. And now they say 1 out of 10 children, regardless of the sex, is carrying a secret of sexual abuse. So a little kid that's being abused, he's going to act it out on his little friends, not out of malice, but just because he's acting out what's happened to him. And that's why there's so much peer on peer, like getting people to talk about the peer on peer things that they've encountered. There's just so much that we need to, like, I want to see the church make it comfortable to talk about it because kids need to. And just our world needs to get comfortable talking about it, because when it's kept, like your story and my story, you may get promiscuous, you start acting out, you start doing things you never thought you'd do. And it's hard to get back on the right path. Super hard.
Absolutely. And I work with teen moms. We have a teen mom support group in Little Rock. And we brought someone in just because they often leave their kids in unsafe situations. So, they leave them with neighbors and friends. And, so we just wanted them to be aware of, you just can't leave your kids. If someone offers to babysit, like, it's not okay. I know you want to go out with your friends. But as this person was talking, this person shared how she'd been sexually abused, and the room just changed. You could just tell everyone, started looking down and crying. And she's like, hold on, like, we need to talk about this. And in that one meeting, there's probably 25 young women and all the leaders. We discovered every single young mom had been sexually abused. Every single leader had been sexually abused in the whole room. And, one young mom I was talking to, she's like, I never had a chance to say no, because, we say no to sex and all the things we tell kids, but they never had a chance. And so then all of a sudden that's already taken away from them. Then they have the high school boyfriend or whatever. I mean, it's this problem. It's a snowball. And then now they have children who they're leaving with aunties and uncles and friends. And we're like, no, we got to stop this. And we need to start by talking about it. But first, talking about the hurt that all of us experience and sharing that, I think really helps too.
Yeah, that entire room. Isn't that remarkable? The entire room. And everyone is like so taboo. And it's like, no, it needs to be so normalized.
Yeah. So just how did you, just hearing your story, how did you decide, like, this is what I want to commit my time to and my heart to, helping young people who are sex trafficked or are vulnerable to that?
Yeah. You know what? I really was not intentionally looking for the trafficking.
Yes.
sort of found me, like tends to happen, right? I was passionate. I went back and got my master's in clinical psych at my 20s, like my late 20s, when I knew I didn't want to return to the advertising world, after kids. And when I was pregnant with my first, I remember, just all the stuff that I was learning. And my first internship, they placed me at really low income area of Chicago. And every one of my clients, it was like super like schizophrenic, just got out of jail, bipolar. Like intense stuff that I had no business meeting with these people.
Right.
As like a little intern, I felt so bad that they would give people me. But every single story, it didn't matter if it was a man just coming out of prison. Like I had this one man, in his late 20s. And he said the first time he was abused, he was gang raped in prison in his teens. Then I had another older woman in her 50s talking about how her uncle started molesting her when she was 9 or 10. And I had this beautiful little girl that was like 19, and she could not get past her abuse. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is, and here I'm pregnant with my first daughter. I'm like, how am I going to protect her? And I remember one of my supervisors saying to me, because I said, I don't know how to raise a girl. Like how, I haven't met anybody that has been sexually abused. How am I going to make sure she's not? And she said, you're asking the wrong question. She said, do you want to be the mom that is going to go crazy pretending that she won't be? Or do you want to be the mom that's so comfortable that she'll be ready to talk to her if she is? And I'm like, oh, and I think that's the piece that, so that's the part of me, like sexual abuse always intrigued me because I'm like, it's everyone. And then when I lived in the North Shore of Chicago, the most wealthy and affluent suburb in Chicagoland, everybody had secrets there too. And I'm like, oh, this thing is packaged in so many ways and it manifests in over shopping, overeating, promiscuity. And I just think it's like the greatest secret. I always say it's the best kept secret in America. So I think I was just intrigued. I was so intrigued, like, wow, this root is everywhere. And then I was invited because of a women's group, basically from my friends from Florida. We're doing with my friends from Chicago, and we just wanted to find underdog charity. And in 2010, someone said, well, how about the fact that our local children are being sold for sex? And I had no clue. Like I was one of those people that thought trafficking was international only. It happened in India, and I don't know what you're talking about, your local kids. And so that was sort of my entree into the sex trafficking world, because I assumed it was like the movie Taken or white vans or abduction. And then when I was told that in America, it's a very different story and it could affect any of our children, because all these little kids that are carrying secrets of sexual abuse are so vulnerable. And the predators today, it used to be stranger danger coming after our children. And now it's, who you kind of know. And the people that are trafficking our kids, it's shocking. Some of them are the parents, the uncles, the brothers, friends. And then sometimes a kid is having so much abuse at home that they can't take it and they run away. And the stats tell us within 48 hours, 80% of our own children, any zip code in America, Arkansas, Chicago, California, within 48 hours, 80% of a runaway will run right into the arms of a predator who will pursue them to get them into sex trafficking. And when he lures the kids in, they are sold 15 to 40 times a day for typically 7 years. And this is, we worked with thousands of American children, and it's the same story again and again. They were 12, they were 13, they ran away, they met a guy, thought he was a boyfriend, turned out not to be a boyfriend. By that point, it's bad enough when you're in high school and you get promiscuous and you slept around or something like that. These guys are telling you you're worth nothing, and you believe it. And they don't even, it's 7 years typically they spend in this lifestyle. And it's not that they're physically restrained. They don't think they're worth leaving. That's the greatest tragedy. Our children are so damaged, they don't think they're worth anything more.
Yeah, it's so heartbreaking. And like you said, you think it's a boyfriend, you think it's a friend, you think it's someone you can trust. It's someone that's older and cool, and they're going to take you out, for coffee. And then they find themselves in the situation where they don't know how to get out of it, or they don't feel like they can or are worth getting out of it. And then just everyone approaching on social media. One of our teen moms, she talked about, she came broken. We hadn't seen her in a couple of months. She came back to our group, and, she said that she had been selling herself, and people had been, because she needed diapers for her kids, because someone had approached her, and she was talking about struggling for money, and she needed diapers for her kids. And so she got caught up in this thing that she didn't even know how she found herself there. And I'm like, it's so everywhere. And, we have 7 daughters, and so and 3 sons. So there's so much, but
you're amazing.
oh my goodness. Yeah. The conversations we have to have, and who's putting a like on your photo? You don't know who that is. Like they could say they're a teen boy. You don't know if they're a teen boy, or even, our little girls. We live in a very safe subdivision, in the country, kind of outside of Little Rock. And our girls were walking around, their 10-year-old, 12-year-old, and the 11-year-old neighbor. And all of a sudden these teen boys are like coming in our yard. I'm like, what are you, who are you? Why are you
Yeah.
following them? And, and it was like, no, it's not okay. Like, oh, we're just talking. We want to see their puppy. I'm like, no, you guys need to leave, go. And so now it's like, nope, you can't even walk around our neighborhood unless you have an adult or an older sibling with you, because this is in our little subdivision, our safe neighborhood. These teen boys were following them, and like, this is not okay.
And Tricia, the majority of parents wouldn't think twice about it, and not because they're bad or, it's just lack of knowledge. Like, oh, cool, other neighborhood kids, oh, they're older, they'll keep an eye on them. Oh, I can maybe go run an errand.
I was like on the porch. I'm like, who are you guys? What are you doing talking to these girls? No, you can't be in my yard.
Yeah, that's most people. I mean, that's the beauty of, like, we offer these classes and they're online. There was one last night. We do them about once a month, and they're called Sex, Lies, and Media, and they're free online training for parents or teachers, anyone that deals with children, because it walks through, it shows the video, like the mom coming to the door and the daughter slamming her door, and her mom's being like, what was on your computer? She's like, nothing. And then she goes back to talking to this, what looks like a little boy that turns out to be a 40-year-old man. And it just walks through scenarios, because most parents, you and I are the super exception to talking about this. Most people are like, oh, I don't want to, no, stop. I don't want to hear about it. But then their children have secrets, and, I mean, who knows what, I'm not saying my children are perfect in any way, and I didn't do it perfect, but at least the awareness. And that's the piece that I'm passionate about, is having the kids feel the permission to not keep a secret, and that it's so common, and let's talk about it. And for parents to be like, can we just show you something? Can we just open your world a little bit?
Yeah, we'll have to put definitely the links in the show notes for those trainings, because I think it's so important. And even talking to my kids about it, because they're like, Mom, you're overreacting and all this stuff. I'm like, okay, imagine, you are a parent and you have a toddler that's in a yard, and there's a fence around to protect the toddler. And outside there's a busy road, there's strangers. Like, you are going to keep that fence up to protect your toddler from all that's happening. But then there's someone that says, here's a little way to get out of the yard, and they're trying to lure the toddler. Is that okay? And they're like, no. And I'm like, that's what all these people are online. I'm like, you're not a toddler, but there are people that are trying to draw you out. There's unsafe stuff out there. They want you to be lured out. And I'm like, there's a fence. We're staying behind the fence, and you might think it's overreacting, but I want to keep you safe. And
even with the fence, absolutely. And there was a Native American man was telling the story. He lived in, like, the most remote, didn't even need the fence, had the whole Native American community just isolated. He was 52 miles from the nearest Walmart, 50 miles from the nearest McDonald's. And he said, I never thought trafficking could enter the world of our children. He said, but everybody has the internet. He said, and the mistake we made was we thought, our pride, and it's all about, our history, and we kept their world very small. And it just took one guy on the internet to get to his daughter and created this big, possible, glamorous life, so far than anything she's ever even dreamed of. He said, we didn't help my daughter dream big enough, because someone came along and within a few days got her to dream big, and she bought it. And then he cultivated her for months online, saying, the more I think about it, I met this guy. He actually is a agent. I could get you into modeling. You just have to meet me. Can you get to town? She got herself 52 miles into the Walmart and met this man, and she was trafficked for 2 years. It took 2 years for this family to get her back.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. It's so, and they are there, and they're presenting these dreams, like you were saying. You're beautiful. I saw your video. You dance great. You sing great. All these things, and I'm like, no. So we are, we talk about it, but it is so hard. Just even having kids today. So, I mean, what encouragement can you give for parents to? You talked about, have these conversations and start young.
Be open.
Yes.
Well, I think, the book Groomed, what's so interesting about my book is that it's not about sex trafficking. It's not a book about trafficking, and it's not a book about sexual abuse, and it's not a book about, here's step 1, 2, and 3 on protecting your kids. But the reason that it's so effective, and if people are open to reading the book and doing the work in the book, it will totally change the way you parent, because it's going to totally change the way you look at yourself, because it gets into everything but sexual, like talks about what are our relationships like? What are our marriages like? What are our friendships like? The things that we're groomed for in other realms. And it helps like connect the dots. I've had so many mothers that have gone through this group with me, and they're like, it's bringing up things and it's making connections. And they're things that what the secret, like I like to say, the secret sauce, I believe, is getting so comfortable with our own stories and getting so comfortable with our own every aspect of it that we can talk about it with our children. And sometimes it's just that comfortable talking that makes kids no longer vulnerable. I think so often we overdo it with, don't want to tell them that about my past, or I don't want to tell them that about my relationship with their dad, or this about this before their dad. But those are the things that we need to get so comfortable with. And in the book, it just sort of opens people's eyes. It goes through chapters like, were you groomed to endure? Sometimes we think we're so strong because we can make it through anything. And that enduring is sending messages. So it's getting our stuff cleaned up so that we're not unconsciously sending messages to our kids, because they're just emulating us. They're looking and they're going to come out pretty similar to some of the messaging that we're sending to them. So it helps us be aware of our messages, and it helps the cycles to be broken, because very often what we're not able to know, like our blind spots, become our children's. And then you're watching. That's why you always see generational, the same sort of things happening generation to generation to generation. So it just, my greatest advice for people, and what I would love, like we're launching Groomed groups throughout the country. Doesn't matter where you live, because we're doing them all on Zoom video. And it's just a beautiful 5-week journey of self-discovery. I think the more self-aware you are, the more you're going to be able to protect, talk like you're very open. And that's something that your kids might be like, no, Mom, like my kids always say, Mom, I didn't get raped today.
Yeah.
But you're talking about it, you're talking about all kinds of things. And I think the book is a great tool to get you comfortable talking about a lot of different things and stories that you can share and talk with your kids and your family.
And I think so many times parents think, oh, well, I don't want to tell my kids about the mistakes I made, because then they'll think they can do it. And I think it's just the opposite.
It's like 1,000% opposite.
And when I say like because I have written about it because I'm a writer. So I've written about, I was a teen mom. I had an abortion when I was 15. I had a baby when I was 17. All these things were in the books. And because I was writing about it, I had to talk to my kids, because I didn't want them to hear about it from a friend at church who's like, your mom was talking at our church today or whatever. And so I had to start these conversations. And what I found, my older kids are 31, 28, and 26. What I found is when they were teens, when I was, just a couple years into talking about it and sharing my story, I would hear them telling their friends, well, my mom had this experience, and maybe you should consider like doing something different. Like they were using my story even to impact their friends. And where I thought like, oh, I don't want them to look at me differently, it was actually empowering them to make better decisions with their lives and even talk to their friends about it, because the conversation was out there. And really, it was like on the way to church, the first time where I was going to share my testimony, I'm like, I need to tell my kids right now.
Yes, I know.
I'm going to be in front of the church in like an hour. And they were little. I mean, I think the youngest was probably 5 at the time, 5, 7, and 9 age. And it's so hard to like share that stuff. And they're like, we love you, Mommy. And even at the beginning, I know they didn't fully understand everything, but just sharing the story, I think, is so important. And then because we are open, I know that they can. I've had kids come, like someone tried to message me, or they can feel like they can approach me because we are talking about it.
Yeah. And it's counterintuitive. Everything in us says, oh, I'm never going to share this. There's so many things. And the book is really fun because it's written, it's funny. It's not like it's a heavy read, but it's a funny read because it's sort of, it gets into the deep stuff, but it does it with a sense of humor, because it's all just, it's life. And, I talk about things in my marriage where I was like, oh, I got it. And that was like my catchphrase. I got it. Like this would happen. Oh no, I got it. It's fine. I got it. And just the taking on and the taking on and the taking on. And then just the connections of why am I always doing things that are beyond what I know I want to do, and they're actually overwhelming, and I am feeling resentment. And it helps piece together like our histories and gives us tools to talk about it so we don't create the same patterns in our kids. And I think it's just a really cool opportunity to look at the way you were groomed. It gets into groomed for appearances, groomed to feel, the scarcity of finances. That was a big one for me growing up. There's never enough. There is not enough for me,
Right.
and all of the messaging. And then did I raise kids to think there's not enough? Did I give them that poverty mindset? And it examines a lot of those things. So it's a full spectrum, but it will hit all the areas.
Yeah. Because it talks about groomed for appearance, groomed to be invisible, groomed to endure, groomed for judgment, groomed for financial failure. I mean, I know I was not, like, as I'm reading through, I'm like, I wasn't even thinking of these things are connected at all. But then, yeah. So just share a little bit about that. I mean, just how did you realize, like, okay, there's so much more to this, to all of it, than maybe you originally thought?
Well, I think an event, and like one of the exercises is, taking you through your childhood from like ages 0 to 10. What were the 5 highlights? What are 5 great things you remember? What are 5 sad things you remember? And just bringing up things, because often, like, people read it and they're like, oh, they'll open the book and they're like, I don't really know what this means, but I'm going to look at this groomed for to be invisible. And I have a woman that I've known, and she's probably in her 70s, and she read the book and she came crying and she said, I've been groomed to be invisible. And then she just went on to share all this stuff. And, and so often we're like, oh, it's the root. It all goes back to sexual abuse, but it doesn't. It goes back to different things in different people. So the book helps everybody sort of get their voice back in ways they might not have even realized they lost it. And this one was like, I can't believe, she said, but when I went through the book, I realized, this happened when I was 7, and then this happened when I was 10. And then I realized nobody really cares. So hers was a different pathway of being invisible, but she played that role. And then goes on, and one woman talks about how, she had her eyes open to the fact that she plays a supporting role in her own life. She's never the main character. She's always the supporting actress.
Wow.
And so I just think, and even groomed for judgment, like that's a big one. I was like you, I had so many secrets and had an abortion in my teens, and I buried mine for 17 years. And in that 17 years of my 20s and early 30s, I had every church leadership position there was. And when we are hiding things, we don't even realize the blind spot that we carry of judgment. And there's a whole chapter on groomed for judgment and how sometimes it feels good.
Right.
What's that about? So it's a really neat unpacking of things, like you said, that people didn't really think about or they wouldn't connect, but it's all a connection, because the truth is, we were created in God's image. We were created for greatness. We were created for, we could do the impossible through our relationship with Christ, but so often we get settled into our little status quo, and this book will just sort of poke some holes at it to try to get you to take another step and another step, because there's always more. There's always more. So it's an invitation to step into freedom you might not even know you need, or a next area of just who you are that you never thought, you didn't have the courage, or you weren't worth it. The same messaging, we all have it, and it just manifests in a little bit different ways. So this book sort of will get into whatever the areas are. And it's a beautiful self-discovery. I'm surprised with different people will text me or message me and say, I can't even believe it. I can't stop crying. But then they take some action steps. And I think that's the fun thing about it. It doesn't leave you there. It takes you into, what do you need to release? Talks about forgiveness. And then it goes into relaunch. And it does some really exciting, helps people look at it in a really different way with a lot of support.
Yeah. And then so again, I think once we start maybe seeing, like, why do I have this reaction, or why do I think this way? And then you can start going back to those moments. Once you start asking yourself questions, then you realize, oh, there's more stuff than I even thought. And it is a sense of discovery within yourself. I remember just within the last couple of weeks, we had a situation where one of our older kids was just acting out against one of our younger kids. And I pulled them both in the room and said, this is not acceptable. And my husband was like, you are really stern. Like, it wasn't that, like, it didn't seem like that big of a situation. And I realized, like, why am I so stern about that? And I just said, you know what? Growing up, my stepdad like my brother would get away with just being mean to me, and he would never do anything. He would just like ignore it. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I wanted my younger child to know, like, it's not okay. Like, I was being stern because I wanted her to know it was not okay. And for me, just to like pause and like, why did I have that such big of a reaction? And so then even I had to go apologize to my older child. I'm like, I know, it seemed like I overreacted, but this is why. And just opening up the conversation, but really like took me like, why was I so stern about this? And it was that feeling like I wanted, I didn't feel like I had someone advocating for me when I was little, and I wanted to be that advocate. But, it's just like, it's like this sense of discovery as you're going through looking at your own emotions, like, why am I doing these things?
Yeah, it's a good, it's an invitation. I hope that people will receive the invitation and open it up.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
It's a great time because we're starting Groomed groups in the month of July, and people could join. And that's the beauty of it too. It's an intimate way to connect because people live in different places around the country, and it's a limited number, and you're able to be on there with other people going through the book in a 5-week process. And it's a cool, like, popcorn effect. Like, this one says it and you're like, oh my gosh, they said that out loud. I could say that we're talking about that.
Yes. Wow.
It goes places that people are like, wow, this is the greatest gift.
Yes.
So I would love to invite your audience if they want to participate in a Groomed group.
Absolutely. We will put we'll put it in all the show notes and send the links and post all the information about that. And again, the book is Groomed, Overcoming the Messages That Shaped Our Past and Limit Our Future. Elizabeth Fisher Good, thank you so much for being here. This book is like, you're not just going to sit down and like buzz through it, because it's causing me to pause and think, and I talk a lot about this kind of stuff. So it's all really good. And I think it's so important for us to understand and to share our stories and to offer hope to other people. Like you're saying, when we can find this healing within ourselves and understand ourselves and share our stories, it just helps our kids and the people in our community in so many ways. So thank you for just even sharing your heart and being willing to open up so that we can all find more healing.
Oh, thank you so much, Trisha. I loved the time with you. Thank you.
Okay, friends, I have to say that talking to Elizabeth was eye-opening to me. So I think so many times we have ideas of what being groomed means. I actually, in volunteering in children's ministry, went through a webinar. It was hours long, and it talks about what to look for in predators and if they're grooming someone, that they're going to exploit them. But after talking to Elizabeth, after looking through her book, I realized even more how we have been groomed in everyday life, whether it is about how we need to look, how we need to act, what we need to do to get a boyfriend, all these things. It's just like these bells are going off in my mind. Ding, ding, ding. Like, this is amazing. So the more I've thought about it, so I'm recording this a little while after I actually had this conversation with Elizabeth. I think the more that I keep thinking about, the more I realized how, even growing up as a young woman, the movies my stepdad watched, the music that was listened to. My stepdad was not a Christian at home. My mom and my grandma became a Christian when I was very young, and just realizing that all those messages from MTV and our local radio and the music I listened to was just telling me that I need to be a certain way to be loved and to be cherished, which, of course, when I, gave myself away in those areas, it stripped me of the dignity and the feeling that I was important. So it is amazing how Elizabeth has been able to take this hard issue that we, talk about sex trafficking and those victims out there, but also bring it home to us. So it's a personal thing that we can start thinking about what we were taught, how our beliefs were formed, and how unknowingly we may be passing that on to other people. So this is why I think it's such an important book, that this is not a book about sex trafficking. It's a book at understanding the messages that we take in and how they have impacted every part of our lives. I think it's so cool that Elizabeth, when she has so many messages that she can be sharing, this is the one that really can apply to every single woman out there. So the walk it out verse of this week is 2 Corinthians 10:5. And this says, we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. And I'm going to read that again because I want you to think about this. So when I would read the scripture before, I would always think of like those really bad thoughts, those ways I wanted to sin, maybe shows that I thought, oh, well, it doesn't really matter if I watch this movie, or whatever those thoughts are. I thought it was completely like something I was choosing to have a thought that went against God. But now, as I'm thinking about this more, talking to Elizabeth, going through some of her book, the arguments and pretensions that set itself up against the knowledge of God, sometimes those thoughts have filtered into how we view ourselves, view our worth, view what beauty is, view what value is. Just the other day, like personally, I've always struggled with my weight. I've always been, heavier than I wish I was, definitely heavier than I was in high school. And the other day I'm like, okay, I know I need to seek help, but I'm never going to look like the magazine cover, and it's okay. Like, it's almost like here I am, my birthday's coming up, almost 49 years old, and saying it's okay. Like, it's not as hard as it is to maybe deal with not being as healthy as I should. It's not as what I set it up in my mind that I'm this horrible person or whatever it is. It's not really, I think I'm a horrible person, but those feelings of wanting to be thin, maybe it's not as important. Maybe I don't need to put my worth and value there to be a certain size. Maybe I can seek God for help without having all those thoughts in my mind that have been there since I was a little, watching MTV, looking at 17 magazine, wanting to be like that. Maybe I need to do some thoughts and digging around that. So such good stuff. Anyway, this verse again. I feel like I'm rambling, but I hope you know what I'm saying. This verse again, 2 Corinthians 10:5. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. And so really, obedience to Christ, what does that mean today? Does it mean serving someone, being thoughtful towards someone? Does it mean loving ourselves and having peace and grace toward ourselves? Is that what God is telling us to do today? To just give ourselves grace? It could be. So anyway, all that to say, I really enjoyed this conversation with Elizabeth. I really recommend this book, Groomed. And it really has me thinking, as you could tell, because I am rambling. Anyway, let me pray for us. Dear Lord, I just thank you so much for every listener out there. I just pray, Lord, that as they listened to this conversation today, that they'll start thinking about maybe ways they've been groomed by society standards and that are putting thoughts against themselves, against others that should not be there, Lord. I pray that you'll help us to take every thought obedient to Christ and help us to see, Lord, how you see us and see maybe we're seeking good things, but for the wrong reasons. Help us to look at our motives, look at our desires, and again, open up our hands and lift them up to Christ and say, how do you see this? How should I see this? Instead of all the ways we've been groomed by society to have those negative thoughts against ourselves, where we just feel like we're not enough. And then we start seeking our enoughness in other ways, Lord, instead of you. So help us today with our thoughts. I pray for Elizabeth. I pray for her ministry. I thank you so much for how you have called her just to be a voice for so many people. I pray for all these young women. I have so many young women, even in my house, and I see the lies they hear and the struggles they feel and their feelings of not feeling enough. And I pray for all the young women in my home and in the homes of my listeners, the neighborhoods of my listeners, that we can point them to your truth and remind them over and over again of their value and worth. I just pray that you will bless Elizabeth's ministry and bring others on board to help her serve others for your glory. And I thank you for this day. In your name we pray. Amen. Well, friend, I am so thankful for you. I am so thankful that you take your time to listen, to walk it out. And my desire for you is that you will sit down with the Word of God. And as you go to God in His Word, that you will be open to what God is asking you to do. That you will look at those scriptures saying, Lord, how can I walk it out today? Who can I encourage? Who can I inspire? Who can I remind of their worth? I think that's so important when we look at that time that we spend in God's Word, not only to say, well, that encouraged me for today, but we will say, how can I walk it out? So that is my encouragement, that you will go and you will walk out all that God is asking you to do.
Thanks for listening to Walk It Out. Head over to the show notes for this podcast and all past episodes at www.walkitoutpodcast.com. If you love the show, share it with someone you know who can make a radical difference in the world. We love new friends.